Welcome. We are going to be talking about food today. We're on the last of the Health is a Gift series, and I will say that initially when I decided to do this series, this was the one I was most excited about, but the more I thought about it, the more I was like, oh, this is like also like one of the scariest ones, because this can be so controversial for people. But at the same time, I felt like, I think there's something to be said here. So I'm just going to put us at ease. I am not standing before you today to tell you exactly how you're going to eat and what you're going to do, etc. I'm here for us to talk today about how God views food and eating and just how we can be generally healthier. Is there a lot more that we said on this topic? Absolutely. But I would encourage you to do your own research. If you need additional help, some of us do have different things going on for us. Please seek that help out. Find somebody, a doctor, a medical professional, etc., a nutritionist, to help you with some of those specific needs. So when you're hearing some of the things that I might be saying here, they may or may not apply to you. So I want you to think of this as there's some personalization to be done, and I think the Bible advocates for that as well. I don't think, as you'll see, that God is like, you must eat Brussels sprouts and only Brussels sprouts. I think he's a lot more nuanced in our world. And one of the wonderful things I love about this is when you look all over the world, God has created particularly fruits and vegetables of all kinds all over this planet, right? Like in certain places we have different types of fruits, but we all have fruits of some sort. We all have vegetables of some sort. So that tells me that God has a variety for us to pick from. And that's great because we have all kinds of climates. So I think God is very creative in what he allows for us to eat. With that being said, let's go ahead and start with a word of prayer and then we'll dig in further. Lord, we thank you for opportunity. I know that you care about our health. I know that you have given us so much in your word, so much in other writings too. And as we continue to even learn through science, it just backs what you tell us about how important our healthy lifestyle is for learning not only more about our physical health, mental health, spiritual health, is all tied together. So I thank you for the opportunity to share today, Lord. May my message be one of hope and encouragement to all of us. Amen. So I'm going to bring us back to that slide you all saw the last time. I'm hoping that I hit unpause. Here we go. Resume sharing, unpause. There we go. Of New Year's resolutions. Now remember, we went through the list. This is where we got started. This is April now. And the top of that list, and the top 5 was to eat healthier. This is a goal that people set. We've already been over the ones on to exercise more, to lose weight, although I suppose some of the eating part could be in there. Again, we're not going to be really specific on that one today. Spend more time with friends and family, talked about rest, etc. And so we know this is on the top of people's minds because it's one of those things that people kind of every year talk about. For those who are people that maybe drink alcohol, a popular thing to do in January is called dry January, if anybody's ever heard that. Even if you're not somebody that drinks alcohol, you probably have heard that. What is that usually about for people? I've overdone it in December. Sometimes people do the same thing with food. I've overdone eating the sweets and da-da-da. And so in January they go, I'm going to cut out, fill in the blank. So I think that's why that ends up being kind of the top, because we've kind of overdone it usually in December. So I want to take a moment for you to think about what's a favorite food item? Like just shout it out. What's a favorite thing that you like to eat? Doesn't have to be the favorite, because if you ask me, I got lots of favorites. But like, what's a thing you like to eat? Bread, yep.
Sweets, I have to be careful with the sweets.
Got some sweets out there, yep. I mean, sweets have their place, but yes, sweets. Ice cream? Yeah, you know what? There are very much ice cream people that I have met. They're like, ice cream is my thing. Okay, yeah. I really like pizza. I have always liked pizza. It's been something I have liked a lot. It's been a little more difficult lately as I've had to make some changes just because of my own health. But I have also learned to appreciate variations on the theme as well because of that. Do you have a favorite? Let's bring this to the realm of fruits and vegetables. Do you have a favorite fruit or vegetable? Go ahead and just shout them out. I tend to like carrots. I don't like them I don't want them 24/7, but I do like carrots.
I like all the vegetables. I could eat vegetables
all the vegetables.
But I can't, potatoes, especially that right now
Potatoes, there's lots of potato fans for sure.
basically a tropical fruit.
Tropical fruits, yep.
Pineapples.
Mangoes, pineapples. Yeah, I love citrus. I really do love citrus. Like whenever I think about it, I'm like, I really, good orange or something like that. I did not like grapefruit growing up per se, but I have learned that there are different types of grapefruit. I didn't know that as a child because the grapefruit we got where I was living was the kind that was, I guess, a yellow grapefruit, and they are sour. And then I since learned that there's something called like ruby red grapefruit, not just the juice, although the juice I think is good too, but I'm like, oh, this is what I needed in my life, and I didn't know it. So I like grapefruit, the red kind now. The other kind I can tolerate, but as a kid, I could not do it. But I like it now. And sometimes our taste buds change. Maybe there were things that when you were younger you did not like, and as you've gotten older, you're like, oh, I can give that a shot. Avocados, yeah.
I love them, but as a kid.
Yeah, certain things, you can't do, or maybe vice versa. Maybe you like something as a kid, now as an adult, you're like, ooh, they like overdid that or whatever.
I try to eat 2 apples every day, so I absolutely love apples.
Apples, absolutely. So when we're bringing up these food things, though, like you can almost relive that experience, right? You can almost relive that. Have you had a moment where you had a food? Do you have any like? Just pull up in your mind any like kind of first encounters with food that like really left an impression, or just a mango. Okay, yeah.
Asparagus.
Say it again.
Asparagus.
Okay, and maybe for good or for bad too. Maybe when I'm asking this too, maybe there's a moment where you're like, yes, it was great, or a moment where you're like, blah. Yeah, yeah. I have several of those moments, and one of them was actually not that I had never had something similar, but the time and place for it. I was traveling. And we were in Sweden, so it was the last time we were over there, and we were in this small town that I can't think of the name of at the moment, and there was churros with ice cream, and I was like, I don't know why churros with ice cream were here in this town, but I wanted some of this, and I should have added the picture in here, but you should have seen the look on my face and we were getting ready to leave as well. So like I was the last thing I got because we were getting back on the bus to go back. We were headed back to Denmark that day. And I was just so excited with those first taste of I was just so like, yes. I just loved it. And we all have stories like that. God is so good to provide us with different things and taste experiences. As we said, there's also the reverse too. And for some folks, food maybe isn't always a happy memory. Food can be problematic for folks, and food can be problematic for us as a society too, because certain foods don't do as well for us. We are especially here in the U.S., we are a nation of folks that have a problem with food in a variety of ways. As much as we were just talking about like those fun memories too, because we have a lot of things that are going on for us. Here's just a couple things that they have attributed to some of the things that we were putting in our mouths. I was kind of surprised by this one, not entirely though, but it says 40% of cancer cases are attributed to modifiable risk factors, including diet. 40%. Now, I'm reading that going like it doesn't say that 40% of them are from diet, but it does say that it's a part of like something you can modify. So you can include other things in there, like we talked about, lack of exercise, etc. But that number just staggered me. I was like, ooh, okay. Roughly 11% of Americans have diabetes. This also shocked me when I went to look this up. And in case you're wondering where this is from, this is Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the American Cancer Society. Now, of the 11% of people that have diabetes, 90 to 95% of that 11%, hopefully you follow the math there, are type 2. That just blew my mind. Because you look at 11%, you're like, that's not too bad of the population. But that means that only 5 to 10% of those are the type 1s, like pancreas is not doing what it needs to do kind of thing. You're, not the type where diet and exercise, as we know now with type 2, is going to come in there. So it's a big problem. That just almost hurt my head when I was thinking about that. The last one here is that diets high in processed foods and sugars are associated with 25 to 35% risk of depression. You'd expect me, of course, to bring in mental health in here, but 20 to 35% higher risk of depression. So what we are putting in does affect our mental health, and the consequences are staggering. Obesity, heart disease. Heart disease is, I don't know if it's still, because I didn't look this up, but at least for a long time, it had been like the number one killer of us women. It's probably, if not number one, it's probably still towards the top. Cancer, as we just talked about, poor mental health, and there's tons of other consequences we could put in there. I don't think anybody in here today is shocked by hearing this. I think we hear these things all the time. And I think our larger question is, what do we do with what we're hearing? Like, we hear these things and sometimes we go, yeah, like, but we also know that there are benefits to eating a healthier diet. Again, probably not going to surprise you. These are very similar if you've noticed, even from rest to exercise, the same benefits are almost across all of these. So this is why we're putting them together as a package. If you're getting rest, if you're getting movement, and you're trying to eat better, this is a great package for all these different things. Longevity, that makes sense, right? If we're having less instances of cancer and heart disease, type 2 diabetes, etc., that we would have the possibility of living longer, assuming, barring accidents or anything like that. Improved cognitive function, energy and productivity. How many of us would love to have more energy and productivity? Disease prevention, better mood and mental health. I mean, all of these things are benefits to eating a healthier diet. Now, I want us to look at what the Bible says about food, of course, because that's what we're here for today. But before we do that, I want to pause and I want to set up a little bit of a principle here for us. I don't know how anybody else grew up. Some of you I can suspect. Some of you are going to be hearing this. I'll have no idea. But in my household, one of the things I really appreciated when I was younger is that food was just there, if that makes sense. Like, you could kind of eat whatever you wanted. Not that we had set meal times. I'm not saying that we could just eat whatever, but like, my mom was raised vegetarian. She was mostly vegetarian while I was growing up. My dad was raised eating meat. And some of you have heard parts of this story. But what I really appreciated about them is there was no conflict about that. And why I'm saying that, some of you might be like, why would that be a big deal? In some Adventist homes, that would be a thing for conflict. And it was not. And I greatly appreciate looking back on that. And my parents really, when we sat down to eat, really were just like, as long as you were eating some food, they were not like, you have to eat the meat or you can't eat the meat or whatever. It was entirely up to us to decide. And they were actually very good. And I remember a few talks where they were like, it is up to you to decide if you want to do this or not. And I'm not saying that's the only thing you can do for like basic health, but it's a big one that people have in their heads, especially because we tend to think of Adventist as vegetarian. And we know that not every Adventist is a vegetarian, but we have that health message, so people tend to see that. But I really, really appreciate that my parents gave us the opportunity to do that, and it wasn't a big deal. Because I know in some other places it is a big deal. And even if you're not Adventist or you weren't born and raised Adventist, food can become a big issue for people. Like, I think of people that are dealing with eating disorders. Again, it may not be a meat versus vegetarian thing, but oftentimes that is families that have very strict rules about how you're eating or not eating or etc. Or we have really strict rules on ourselves as well. We can go off in the gutter on either side of this issue, which is why I find this somewhat intimidating to talk about, because you could absolutely go off on the side of being too strict and stringent, and you can absolutely go off on the other side of like, nothing matters and we don't have to do anything for our health. And I'm trying to walk that line of like, what makes sense, what does God have for us? And I don't think he's wanting us to run down the gutter of each of these, which is why I want us to look at, of course, starting in the garden. So you guys heard this actually this morning, parts of this. We were talking about Genesis, because God created heavens and the earth. He created earth, he created plants and trees and human beings and etc. And after he had done all of that, this is Genesis 1:29-30. This is just the original diet that he gave them. And then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seeds in it. They will be yours for food, and to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. So we have to remember this is a perfect world, and God has created a bunch of plants and things that people can eat. And I think that's great, and I think it gives us one of the guiding principles, and we're going to see this later too, is that I have done a lot of reading over the last 6 months, particularly around issues of food and diet and stuff for my own personal research, but also for wanting to support people that I work with and understanding the connection there to better mood, better mental health, etc. And of course, hopefully better physical health outcomes. But my realm is mostly mental health. And every book, I've read a variety of books on it, every book, even if they can't agree on the types of diets, and I really want to use diets loosely because sometimes diets have negative connotations, like we're trying to restrict something, but mostly the thing that the writers I've seen, read across, they may not all agree on all the different things about you should do this and that, or shouldn't do this or that, but they all tend to agree. Fruits, more vegetables. If nothing else, we can agree with that. You can fill in, with other things, but more fruits and more vegetables, you can't go wrong. And I think we all kind of know that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later too. But it makes sense right here in the garden that God's like, I'm giving you fruits and vegetables to start with here. It says every seed-bearing thing. So you can't go wrong with adding more of what was in God's original plan. Now I'm going to move us to another section about food. You might be like, what are we doing here? Because food is used a lot in the Bible, also as metaphor and symbol. So I want to spend just a little bit of time looking at the metaphor and symbol, because I think this also helps us understand how I was looking at one title. I didn't get to read the article, but I was looking at one article when I was skimming through by an Adventist writer, and the title was like, "Is God obsessed with food?" Because food is like all over the Bible, and I was like, that is actually kind of a funny title, but at the same time I was like, right? But he uses this as a powerful metaphor because food is a part of all of our daily lives. Nobody here is like, I don't know what you're talking about when I'm talking about food. We all have to eat. We all have to put something in to keep our energy going, etc. So Jesus used it a lot in his work. We're going to see that. God used it a lot in different areas because it's something that people are interacting with all the time. So Exodus 21, 1 to 28, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is the Passover meal with unleavened bread and the lamb, right? They're literal food things that they are eating for sure, but they also are pointing towards Jesus, right? Exodus 16, 4 to 36 talks about that manna in the wilderness. Again, a literal thing. There was manna that's all over the ground, but what was that pointing towards? That God is going to provide for their daily and every needs. Psalms 23:5. You prepare a table before me. This is not literal. This is David's famous Psalms 23. The Lord is my shepherd. You prepare a table for me. It's a metaphor, but we all know when we see that that's a sign of hospitality, welcome, feasting. Proverbs 9, 1 to 6 talks about wisdom's feast. Isaiah 55, 1 to 2, come, all you who are thirsty. Again, it's not literal, but we all know what that is like. We need water in our daily life, multiple times a day. Matthew 5, 6, Jesus says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Again, it's not a literal thing, but what is that telling us? How often do you get hungry? Or how often do you need to eat? Maybe we don't get hungry. Maybe hopefully like eating before you get too hungry. But I don't know about you. I'm a person that eats, I know not everybody does, 3 meals a day. And I do get a little hungry before each of those. And hopefully I'm drinking throughout the time. And what it's pointing us to is that we should be, just like we're waiting for that next meal, hopefully you're not obsessing over the next meal per se, but just like we're ready for that next meal or taking water, that it should be a constant part of our life. And then Revelation 19:9 says the marriage supper of the Lamb. All of these metaphors using what we understand about food. So God is not, part of why I'm bringing this out too, God is not like, I hate food, like you should hate food too, right? He made food, he made good food. He uses the symbol all the time to help us put that into our minds and help us understand. The other thing that I think is really important here too is there's a huge connection between food and hospitality. There's several stories, particularly in the Old Testament and New Testament, and if you've ever traveled even in the Middle East today, which I've done a couple times, there are very hospitable people here, for sure. But I will say that as a whole, our culture isn't necessarily like everybody's like that. And I guess not everybody in the Middle East would be like it, but there's a very rich culture of hospitality there. And the Bible points out some of these too, but nowadays you can even see that when you go to places, people are very welcoming. They're offering you whatever. And Turkey, which I'm not a coffee drinker myself, they would love to offer you this little coffee thing, like everywhere that you would like come into people's spaces, they would be offering that to you. It's just expected to. So we have Abraham, who has hospitality to those 3 visitors who turn out to be angels and the Son of God. We have Ruth's story where she's gleaning in the field. Remember that God had said that they could, like when they went through to harvest, that they could leave stuff for the poor and the widows. Right, that was actually about hospitality, so these women could continue to have food in their household. Mary and Martha, their hospitality to Jesus. We see Jesus dining with Zacchaeus, right? As soon as Zacchaeus comes down, he's like, basically, Jesus said, I'm coming to your house today, but like he opens his house and goes with him. Acts, we see the breaking of bread from house to house. I mean, this is what makes food more than just food to us. If you share a meal with somebody, when you sit down and you have that full, rich experience. And there is something for that. Some of the books that I was reading on this were talking about why is it that in France, was their example, it says, why is it in France when they eat all these things that in America, air quotes, we're calling unhealthy? Some of them debatable, whatever. But they're like, how come they are, as a general population, aren't getting fat, is what they were asking. And one of the things that they looked at was they're like, well, how much are they eating? How processed is whatever it is that they're eating compared to what we had? But they also said, well, look at how people are eating. They're like, these people will sit down and eat with family, with friends. We'll take the time to sit down at it, even if it's an outdoor cafe or whatever. We'll sit down, and there's a culture of sitting in community around their food. Some of us have, some of us do not have. And they were pointing out that there's something about sitting down at the table, sitting down in community and having food that is very healthy for us. And I thought that was a great mentality as well, because it seems like the more skewed we get on the food, the more strict we are, the more isolated it makes us, right? If you've ever met somebody or had somebody that was more on the extreme side of restriction, it's very hard, not always, to sit down with them and have a meal, because they're like, I can't do da-da-da-da-da. Again, it doesn't mean that you can't have a meal with somebody like that, but it can be very hard because they are a little more isolated in their needs. I'm hoping that makes sense. But the idea here that it's more than what we eat. Is what we eat important? Yes, there is a lot of science out there to tell us some basic things, which we'll get to more. But I want us to develop this bigger as a principle and thinking about this much broader than that. So this brings us to, this is the, I call this food fight, because this week when I was thinking about how I was putting this all together, I've been thinking about it for a while, because like I said, I've done plenty of reading. It was like the first thing I wanted to do, and I kept holding off and said, no, I'm going to do it last. And I was listening to Nathan Brenner from Arise, and he wasn't even necessarily talking about food. He's talking about Romans, and he read this, and I was like, this is the thing that I was looking for. This is the thing when I was looking for principle, and it was exactly there, and I was like, okay, Lord, this is it. So this is Romans 14:2-3. He says, one person believes he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables. Let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains, and let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. And you might be like, okay, what does this exactly mean? So he went on, what I loved about it is he went on to explain the background, the context here, because the argument was this, and it was about meat, but if you really think about it, it could have been about a variety of things, and people were going to eat meat, and the meat at that time was being sacrificed to idols. Like that's usually how you ended up getting it. This is also thinking about this is not Jewish territory he's talking about. He's talking about Gentiles. And the cheapest time of year to get meat. So they weren't eating a lot of meat. They culturally just weren't eating a lot. It was kind of like a special deal. So that meant that the time of year where you could get the most meat, think about this just from a practical standpoint, would be when there was a big festival. If there's a big pagan festival and everybody brings their whatever to be sacrificed, there is a surplus of meat. The priests get the surplus of meat, and they can only eat so much as well. And so what do? They sell it back out to folks. Maybe they give it to the, I don't know what they have, a butcher shop or whatever. And so that would bring the price down, right? That makes sense, right? Because you have supply and demand going on. It would bring the price down, so it's more affordable for people to actually get. And so the problem here was that some people, they weren't thinking all of that through, and they'll say, oh, I just get that, go to the store, you buy the meat during that time of year because it's the cheapest amount, and it didn't bother them. But some people would go, no, that meat was sacrificed to whatever, and it would cause an absolute chaos. And so I love this because if you've ever been around anybody, don't have to be a Seventh-day Adventist to have food fights, if you've ever been around anybody who feels really strongly one way or the other about something, especially regarding food, it can quickly become a problem. And in fact, Nathan told another funny story. I thought it was funny. It was kind of sad, but I thought it was a little bit funny because I had not heard it termed this way. But he said one of the first churches that he had pastored, he's like, they were very, very gung-ho on the health message, which isn't a bad thing, obviously, because we're talking about health today. But they were very gung-ho on it to the point that they were like, no pepper. Do not bring pepper, black pepper in here. And so some people, this actually makes me think of people that run around with hot sauce in their pockets. So some people wore black pepper in their pockets kind of thing. And he said that they would have potluck, and those people that wanted just a little more flavor and thing would bring out their black pepper, and they'd put it just on their dish. They're not like, put it on anybody else's, put it on their little portion of it. And people would get so mad. He said people would say, get rid of that devil's dust. And I was like, oh my God, devil's dust? I was highly amused, but also I felt really bad for the person who's just trying to eat their meal with a little bit of pepper on it. You know what I mean? And we have all, I bet in this room, have all experienced stuff like that. You all have heard the stories. Like that, where people have gone, I am going to just say, gone to the extreme. And we have forgotten some of these principles. We have forgotten the idea of hospitality. We have forgotten that God is looking at more than just what we're eating. But the other thing that I thought was interesting here, and he gave one more point, and he said to this, he said, pick up the words here. It says, let not the one who eats despise. Let not the one who abstains pass judgment. He really calls out what the actual issue is not the fact that they were eating meat. He's like, it's your attitude that you're bringing towards this. And he set up a scenario. He said, so imagine this. He's like, instead of, let's just take it out of the realm of meat and ancient days. And he's like, let's just say that, and I'll just use it for you guys too. Let's say that somebody was like, oh, we're going to hold a prayer meeting, and we're going to fast before we do this prayer meeting. We're going to fast for like a day or something like that. So let's say you all come in here, you've been fasting for a day, and I decide that I don't want to fast. I'm not necessarily going to participate. But I'm like, oh, I'm going to use my favorite food. He did too. But I'm like, okay, I'm really hungry. So I'm going to come to the church. I'm not participating in the fasting, but I'm going to participate in the prayer meeting. And I come in with a big old pizza. And you guys haven't eaten for 24 hours. And not only do I come in with this big old pizza, but I'm like, oh, this is so great. I love it. I'm feeling great. I'm eating this pizza. Would you not be tempted to despise me? 24 hours you haven't eaten anything, and I come and eat, yeah, exactly. And I come and eat this pizza right in front of your face. If I was flipping that around, I would so be tempted to that. And it just brought it into context. It wasn't necessarily about the food. It's like, you would be tempted to despise me, right? If I did that, right? And we could do the same thing for the person who's eating the pizza, to be like, oh, those silly people, why are they fasting for 24 hours, right? That's not the point. I have a couple additional quotes that I wanted to share that I thought held good to this. This is actually, I did end up reading, by the way, this comes from Counsels on Food and Diet. I did finally read that entire book because I wanted to know. I've heard so many things about it. I've been bashed over the head with different things out of this book at various points in my life, and I wanted to know for myself. And I actually found her to be a lot less bashing than people were making it to be. So here's a couple quotes that I thought made sense towards this. She said, many of the views this is going to hit home here, by Seventh-day Adventists differ widely from those held by the world in general. Those who advocate an unpopular truth should, above all the others, seek to be consistent in their own lives. They should not try to see how different they can be from others, but how near they can come to those whom they wish to influence, that they may help them to the position that they themselves so highly prize. Such a course will commend the truths they hold. So follow that in the food context. She is talking about this food. She's going, if you're way off in the gutter on one side or the other, and there might be different reasons why you can't eat certain things, but if you're so way off that you can't be relatable to people, it's going to be very hard for them to want to come over. Like, come and join me here at this church. I only eat celery and water. Like, I would not think that was great. I would not be thrilled to do that. Do you know what I mean? And so she's trying to point out, she's like, we need to find the common ground. And now let's say if all that's, hopefully that's not all you should, that should not be all you're eating. I just want to say that. But if you have, for whatever reasons, have like restrictions on things you can eat, there's still ways for us to be hospitable and still be around each other and whatever, without being that extreme. But I love that she just points out, she's like, this should be appealing. Right? Bringing people in. Also, too, we shouldn't just be bringing people in because you have to eat the way that I eat. I don't think that's fair either. All right. She said, those who have but a partial understanding of the principles of reform are often the most rigid, not only in carrying out their views themselves, but in urging them on their families and their neighbors. The effect of their mistaken reform, as seen in their own ill health and their efforts to force their views upon others, give many a false idea of dietetic reform and lead them to reject it altogether. Ooh. I mean, let that sink in, right? Those of us who have gone too far, too extreme, sometimes equate, that's how God is. He wants you to just be on the celery and water diet. And that's it. That's all you got. And she just points out here, she's like, mistaken reforms can be seen. And there was many stories, if you read Counsels on Food and Diet, there's many stories where she was urging people, you've got to get more variety in your diet. You've got to expand on this. You are being too restrictive in what you're doing, particularly around restriction. People were being too strict. And she repeatedly is like, no, you have got to expand this. You've got to add these different things in. You can have a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But things that people were like, oh, I would never touch, fill in the blank. And she's like, you need to eat some of these things. You need to put some of these things back in your diet. That does not look appealing to just be on again, they weren't just on water and celery. I'm just picking on water and celery. But it gave me a whole new perspective of this food fight. It gave me a whole new perspective of like when we're thinking about food and eating, is it important? Absolutely, but we should not be falling into one ditch or the other. So this is just a little bit as we get ready to wrap up of like what have I learned then out of this? If I were to give you some tips, here's what I would say. Here's some very general principles. We should be drinking plenty of water. And this is a hard one even for me. I get really busy, so even I'm like constantly having to remember to do this. But water, great place to start. We're lucky here, particularly in the U.S. Most of us have access to clean water. I know that's a problem elsewhere in the world, but we have access to it. We can get to it. We have some great water here in Wrangell, especially if you can get it out of the 10-mile spot or whatever. Like we got some great kind of spring water to get on. Limiting sugar. Okay, notice it's not like no sugar ever, because actually sugar's in a lot of things, natural and other sugars and fruits and things like that. We do eat, I will just say, in all the books I've read on it said we do eat too much sugar. So it's okay if you're like, what? I can't believe you're talking about sugar. It's not that you're never going to eat sugar, but we do tend to eat too much. So even just trying to limit would be helpful. And then no surprise right here, what we were just talking about, more fruits, more vegetables. There are other things to eat, yes. There are grains, yes. Some of us are going to eat meat, etc. All these other things are going to build into that, but there was so much variation when I was reading about this, about how much of what of these other things that you should be doing, that it was almost like hurting my head. I'm like, yeah, you've really got to pay attention to how your own body responds to adding these different things in. But here's the thing. A true diet really should also consider somebody's individual nutritional needs, right? So just because, I'm going to use me for a moment, because I had just found out, some of you heard this, I just found out that I can't do dairy. I in no way saying that mean that anybody else here should have to go without. If you want to, do it for your own reasons, but that's personal to me, knowing me and knowing like what my needs are. I don't expect anybody else. I also don't necessarily expect anybody else to like completely cater to that idea as well. So when I'm like bringing stuff, I'm trying to remember what are things that I can bring that I can eat. And I assume that everybody else has other things, whether it's your personal preference, which it talks about here. You have personal preferences, like we just mentioned. If you don't like asparagus, hopefully we're not shoving asparagus on you, Our culture, right? We all come from, like here we're all in Wrangell, but we all come from actually different cultures and background. I know that also I grew up with some Southern culture food, sweet tea, lots of sugar. But I do love sweet tea, but I also like tea, herbal teas that don't really need sugar as well. Biscuits and gravy. I mean, my mama was a great cook, so some of those things are just very nostalgic. I really love having those. I've maybe modified some of those things to fit where I'm at or what I can easily get. But we all have different kind of food cultures. Environmental sustainability, I mean, that's a big thing even thinking here. We hear a lot about fishing here and how much people can fish for personal use, how much commercial fishing can be done, etc. All of those conversations, while they can be hot buttons, I'm not going to get into that, all kind of run around the idea of like how sustainable, what the fish runs are doing, etc. Right? We could fill in the blank for actually anything. If you're over harvesting, berries is another thing we get here. We don't have limits on berry picking here. But if we were overdoing that and we were just like taking so many berries, we might have some concerns that we need to leave some back so these will repopulate or whatever. So those are just some basic principles on it. So here's the final takeaway. I'm going to say this. As much as I just went through, like, here's things to think about. Ultimately, it's not entirely about what we eat. Okay? Like, eating's important. Eating healthy and finding out what that means is important. And God does actually care about eating, even though I said it's not all about what we eat, but God does care about what we eat. But really, I think his biggest concern is how it connects us or disconnects us from him. Is what we're doing bringing us closer to him, or is it dragging us further away from him? If we're in a ditch somewhere and thinking, here's one last final thing to throw in here. If you're thinking whatever ditch that you're in, that you're earning your way to heaven, if you're earning your way by eating fruits and vegetables, you've missed the gospel. You have entirely missed the gospel if you think just eating is how you're going to earn your way. That's works, my friends. That is works. That is not by faith. Doesn't mean, eat fruits and vegetables, but that's not how we are saved. We're not saved by what we eat. We are saved by faith in Jesus Christ. But I also want us to consider, we can also all improve on stuff. We can always improve. And I mean, hence why I'm bringing this here. It is a gift and a privilege for us to have the information that we have now to make healthier steps, to be healthier. So I just want to encourage us, whatever that looks like, whatever God's got in store for you and mind for you. And it can be hard. You may have to, like I've had to recently, take something out that you've had for your entire lifetime. You might have to do something like that. You might not. You may get to add something back in. I don't know what it's going to be, but we can all make those little steps because God ultimately wants us to be able to connect better with him. Because here's the thing. As we wrap it all up, what have I been saying this whole time? To be in good health really is a gift. And to be able to have the knowledge is probably one of the best gifts that God can give us, because it gives us the ability to connect with him, to be with him. And our final word on this, so let's eat with him.